Welcome to the candidate discussion for the Republican primary for Minnesota House District 55A. My name is Michael Clem. I'm the current chair of the Shakopee Chamber Public Policy Committee, and our candidates are Bob Loonan and Erik Mortensen. We'll begin with opening statements that will be 2 minutes long, and then we'll proceed to questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question. The other will have 30 seconds to rebut, and then we'll receive the same question and have an opportunity to answer that in a period of 1 minute. And the opposite candidate will then have 30 seconds to rebut. In conclusion, we will have closing statements, each of up to 2 minutes long. So for the opening statements, we'll begin with Erik Mortensen.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for doing this. It's unfortunate that we couldn't have more people in attendance, but of course, as everybody knows, our Democratic governor, Tim Walz, has appointed himself the king of Minnesota, and he alone gets to choose the rules for the other 6 million of us. And for anybody watching who doesn't already know, I grew up right here in Shakopee. Grew up on 2nd Avenue down by Aurora Malting. Graduated Shakopee High, class of 1997. And my wife and I, we have 2 kids, Roma and Riker. They go to the Catholic school in town. In fact, I went to Sax. And hopefully by now, everybody knows that I'm running to protect the American dream for future generations. They should be afforded the same opportunities that we've all been afforded. But unfortunately, those opportunities and the American dream itself is under constant assault. In fact, over the last 6 months, the ferocity of that assault has only increased. And there's 2 types of politicians we have to blame for this. One is radical leftist Democrats that have been in control of the state for far too long. In fact, now they're advocating for this Marxist movement we're seeing. And 2 is gutless Republicans like Bob Loonan, who refused to do anything about it. He had 4 years in office. He squandered all 4 years. Now I guess he wants to squander another 2. I stand here as a principled conservative, a reliable conservative voter. In fact, I'm the only conservative in this race.
Thank you. Mr. Loonan.
Well, I too would like to thank the Chamber for hosting this important event to get the word out of what's going on in this primary race. And the reason this is important, I've been waiting to do this for 2 years. The reason this is important is that you've got a bunch of misnomers being put out there by people that are supporting Erik Mortensen and then Erik Mortensen himself. I'm Bob Loonan. I am the past state representative. I served 2 terms there. I'm pro-life. In fact, I am the only candidate in this race who is endorsed by MCCL, Minnesota Concerned Citizens for Life. That's based on 100% voting record for pro-life. 100%. I'm a budget hawk. I was on the Health and Human Services Committee, and in the budget process for that, I went through and I was able to take out funding for redundant programs. And what I mean by that is nonprofits would come in, contended they needed an appropriation for something, and we would do some research and find out that there were multiple nonprofits working on the same problem and they weren't even aware of each other. We cut some of that out. I was able to go through and get rid of a whole bunch of studies that had gone for more than 5 years. If you studied something for 5 years and you still haven't discovered what the problem is or the potential solutions, then we move on and let's reallocate the money somewhere else that's more effective. I'm also the only candidate in this race endorsed by the National Rifle Association. I'm the Second Amendment candidate. They got all these people out there going around that I'm anti-gun. Here's my background. I got 27 years teaching youth hunter safety. I don't just say I'm for responsible gun ownership. I put my time and my treasure into it. I walk, I don't just talk. I'm a proven conservative problem solver. I have a track record of getting things done, and I have the experience. I can win in November. 2 years ago, this seat had something happen that hasn't happened for decades, which we are a Republican area being represented by a DFL. That falls on Erik Mortensen.
So we'll move now to our questions. Mr. Mortensen, the first question is for you. There's a sense that things do not get done in St. Paul. What experience do you have that will make you effective?
Sure. Good question. So my entire career has been one of a change agent. My corporate days, I was one who came in when we had difficult conversations or difficulty with customers, large customers. We service some of the biggest retailers in the world. And it was my job to break down what was happening and understand where the fat existed, where we could trim the fat, and how to advance things forward. Then I opened my own company. And it was a constant challenge as to how do we operate as lean as possible. So my entire career has been one of identifying problems. I'm very operationally sound and very process-oriented. And once identified, creating a plan to eliminate that fat and improve upon things.
Mr. Loonan, the same question to you. There's a sense that things don't get done in St. Paul. What experience do you have that will make you effective?
Well, the media plays part of a role in that, and that they choose what to present out there. Frankly, in my experience, and I wouldn't expect you to know this because you've never been on a council or a board in the legislature, so I get it. But behind the scenes, you've got people working to end up with the best bills possible. The sense of not getting things done begs to the question that in this race, I'm the only candidate that has pledged that when I get in, I caucus as a Republican. I'm running as a Republican. I'm caucusing as a Republican. I throw that question out to Mr. Mortensen to address. He's pledging his loyalty to this third caucus, which consists of 4 legislators. We're seeing these ridiculous bills come through the House of Representatives because the Republicans only have 55 members right now. He's going to a caucus that only has 4, which is incredibly ineffective. Governance is a team sport. Having the majority matters. I'll win in November and get us towards that majority as Republicans.
Sure. Can I respond to that?
Yes.
Since he asked me to. It's funny you don't mention that these 4 people are also Republicans. In fact, they are the 4 most conservative Republicans. And in fact, the caucus that you pledge your loyalty to, that is the St. Paul swamp. Those are the people who want to get nothing done. And when I went to visit you at the Capitol in 2017, you told me when you were elected, you knew nothing about budgeting. You had to go sit with business leaders and understand what a budget was and how it worked. I've been budgeting since 1998, and I'm assuming you're 20 years my senior.
The next question actually is on the budget, and Mr. Loonan, you're first up on this one. What are your ideas to deal with the pending deficit next year?
So Mr. Mortensen is right, is that I felt like I was inadequate regarding budget information. So what I did is 27 Fridays in a row, I went to breakfast with a different CFO with a government budget. A budget is not a budget. All budgets are different. A government budget. There's things like appropriation tails. Are you familiar with that?
Go ahead. It's your time.
You go through and what happens on these budgets is you have to go through and allocate money and reallocate money instead of just taxing more. One of my proposals is that immediately when we go back, we should unappropriate any revenue, any funding going to positions that are vacant. I'm going to guess that's going to be anywhere from 7 to 13%. That goes back in the general budget and then is available to handle the deficit, which looks like it could be as high as 5% budget deficit to handle that. If we do that, and by the way, when unions negotiate a raise, those vacant positions get a raise as well. That act, nobody loses their job because there's nobody there. That's just the first step and it causes more effective spending in government.
Mr. Mortensen, what are your ideas to deal with the pending budget deficit?
Sure. Well, in my corporate days, even my own personal business, I think we need to treat the government budget like a business. But unfortunately, there's been too many people that are scared of actually making cuts and telling people no. So I've got 2 ideas. One of them, we need to break down these omnibus bills. Bob here has voted for every single omnibus bill that anybody would throw at him because leadership told him to do it. I want to break down omnibus bills and have a rule that says any program, the famous government acronyms out there, any acronym out there, any program over $100 million needs to have a standalone vote. And I think when legislators are forced to vote on issues like CCAP, if they are forced to live and die based on the merits of that program, that's how we can trim the fat.
Moving now to the topic of...
Can I rebuttal then?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so, well, first of all, it's unrealistic. But again, you've never been on a council, on a city council, on a board or anything. So I get that you don't understand how it works. Omnibus bills, first of all, are legal. They're required to be single subject. That's why who has the majority matters, because the Speaker of the House rules on whether an omnibus bill is single subject or not. Every provision in an omnibus bill has gone through committee process. All the legislators are aware of what's in there. They may not know where it is, but they know what's in there or it's not in there. going through, leadership has never told me to vote for a bill in 4 years, ever.
That's not true. You know that. Do I get my 30 seconds then?
Yes, and then I believe we'll move on to the next topic after that.
Sure. I never said that omnibus bills are necessarily unconstitutional. What they do is they skirt accountability. They're loaded with so much stuff. And then what you would say, and I've heard many legislators say it, is, well, I had to do it. It was an omnibus bill. In fact, that's how you voted to fund Planned Parenthood, was through the Health and Human Services omnibus bill. And that's a fact. And votes don't lie.
So I believe a new topic's been raised. We could go ahead and rebut that if you choose to.
Where in that bill did I plan or fund Planned Parenthood?
You fully funded the medical assistance program.
Correct.
Yep, which pays for publicly funded abortions.
Where in the bill does it say that?
Well, the bills don't say. I think you know how this works. The bills don't say to the provider at which the money goes. It goes to a program. Planned Parenthood's website says they accept medical assistance as a form of payment.
But the bill literally said in there, I don't know if you read the bill, maybe not, obviously not. The bill literally says in there that funds cannot be used, public funds cannot be used to pay for abortions.
No.
Do you happen to remember the bill number?
Well, he's in Senate File 2 he's talking about.
Yep.
Okay.
Then why does it happen?
So let's move on then to the next topic of healthcare. And this first one is for Mr. Mortensen, or he'll be first up. What can be done to reduce the burden of healthcare costs?
Sure. It's like so many other things. You notice where the hand of government is heaviest is where the costs are exploding. You've got housing, education, and healthcare. Those are the three areas where costs explode. So the answer is simple. It's get government out between you and your doctor.
Mr. Loonan?
I'm not sure what he was talking about there. Government isn't the one between you and your doctor. The insurance companies are.
And let me restate the question in fairness.
Yep.
What can be done
I'm rebuttaling to his
go ahead.
first. Okay. The government isn't the one, what he's contending. That's actually the insurance carriers. Insurance networks deny access, are a non-medical person telling a medical person what to do. So I actually agree with the concept he's going. It's just he's got the wrong bad guys, insurance companies.
So
the
MNsure
networks
doesn't
that they form.
exist?
Excuse me?
MNsure doesn't exist?
MNsure is not even an insurance company. MNsure is a computer program. It's a portal to connect the patients with insurance coverage. It's not insurance coverage. But again, I wouldn't expect you to know that. Involvement teaches that. Experience teaches that.
So, Mr. Loonan, what can be done to reduce the burden of healthcare costs?
Well, first of all, transparency. People should get to know what things cost before you buy them. There's nothing else you buy that you don't know what it costs until after the purchase. There is a Minnesota statute, 62J.81, that requires a provider tell the patient what the costs are going to be if the patient asks. Now, requiring the patient to ask is a problem for me, but that was what the deal got cut for the bill to be able to go through to get enough votes to pass it. But the consumers are the ones that have to put on their big boy shoes and sit there and bring pricing back in. Now, there are going to be times in healthcare where it isn't appropriate to ask what the costs are, but there's many, many times when it is. We also have to take a look at cost shifting. We've got government under reimbursing for medical procedures, and providers are saying, well, we're not going to take patients on MA. And then the government said, well, here's what we'll allow you to do. We'll allow you to add that money you're losing on our patients over to insurance covered patients. That's the definition of fraud.
So did you just say that the government was involved in healthcare at the end there? I think you did.
What I'm saying is government is providing health insurance, yes. But they aren't between the patient and the doctor. What they're doing is they're going through and they got a reimbursement rate. Medicare and Medicaid have different reimbursement rates than MNcare. And that cost shifting that they're forcing is problematic. Single payer doesn't reduce what the cost of health care is, by the way. It simply reduces who pays for it.
So we'll move now to our next topic. This is on governmental power. What special powers should the governor have during a pandemic, if any? Mr. Loonan.
Well, it's a continuum. You know, the legislators allowed him to take peacetime executive powers at the beginning, and that was to allow him to move swiftly, which I think was appropriate, frankly. I think we're way past that. We probably are in agreement on this, Erik and I, and that we're far past that. The bill that has to get passed into law is that to end the powers, you don't need a vote to rescind the powers by both bodies. You have to have a vote by both bodies to continue the power. because the minority, the people that are out, have absolutely no say in it. We're in a situation right now where we have one man making all of these decisions unilaterally, and there's all these different perspectives, this data input, that are not being at the table for him, and it's problematic. And it just begs an opportunity for mistakes to happen. By the way, every Republican in the legislature has voted every time they could to rescind Governor Walz's executive power that he's got. Everyone.
Mr. Mortensen, same question. What special powers should the governor have during a pandemic, if any?
Yeah, well, I think Bob's right that both the House and the Senate should have to both approve moving forward. So I think the governor should have very few powers. I think the government in general should have very few powers. But what Bob just said is not true, that every single Republican voted to shut down the emergency powers. The first time this came up in the ballot, and this is a great lesson for you, Bob, and a lesson on how powerful those 4 caucus members that broke off from your savior, Kurt Dowd, are. Those 4 Republicans that broke off, they're the ones who led this entire initiative. And the first time it came up for a vote, the old caucus, the failed caucus under Kurt Dowd, they refused to support it. But what happened over the course of the next several months is those 4 Republicans, those strong, brave Republicans, they pulled the rest of the House Republican caucus along with them. And that is how we can make fundamental change in this state.
Any response, Mr.
Yeah,
Loonan?
well, that comment had almost nothing to do with facts.
They're all facts.
That third caucus, not the Republican caucus, that third caucus did propose stripping the powers. To have a discussion on an amendment like that, you have to have at least 15 of 134 members raise their hand that they want to have a discussion. They couldn't even get that, so it wasn't discussed. Shortly after that, the Republican caucus proposed stripping the powers, and it went down on a party line vote, of course, but every Republican voted for it.
Mr. Mortensen, the next question begins to you. This is on budget and education. Should the state provide additional financial support to local school districts that are facing financial challenges?
I think I would say no. When you look at education spending at the state level has gone up 50% over the last 10 years. When you look at enrollment across the state, enrollment's only gone up 5.7%. If anything, education spending at a state level is well over its skis compared to enrollment numbers. So I think each individual school district should be responsible for themselves.
Mr. Loonan, what do you think regarding whether the state should provide?
Can I reply to that?
You may.
Okay. So here's the numbers on this. In Minnesota, the average per pupil revenue a school district gets is 14,000 per pupil. You go into a classroom and you've got 20 students, a small class, 20 students. You've got $280,000 in that classroom. A teacher with benefits and everything costs anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000. Where is all of that other money going? The schools need to prioritize their programs based on the number one priority a school should have, which is teaching students to learn. Then we decide if we cut or add money.
Would you like to add any further information on that question then?
Oh, yeah.
Whether the state should provide additional financial support to local schools or not?
So I was a school board member for years, and going through and taking a look at how the funding happens, there's a base formula that schools get on a per pupil basis. When we go through and we increase spending in schools, when they put 2% on the base formula, that's unfair to Shakopee. I think we're at $11,700, something like that per pupil we're getting here with all our compensatory funding, all those different things. Minneapolis, I think, is $25,000 to $27,000. So they get a 2% bump and we get a 2% bump. It just exasperates that disparity even more. And we're basically putting gas in a car that isn't running. Those school districts up there have fundamental problems because of the mindset in those school districts that isn't a mindset of effort and going through that relationship between effort and achievement. I know the Shakopee School District is going to be going out for an operating referendum. One of the things we need to take a look at, in all honesty, is all of the revenue school districts get, not just the base formula, not just operating referendum, which Shakopee does not have right now, but also compensatory funding.
Mr. Mortensen, anything more to add on that?
Yeah, I just would add that all this tough talk coming out of Bob, this is all talk. It's all talk. When you look at the actions, you look at the voting record, he talks about people have to prioritize spending. Well, where was the prioritization when he voted for a 10% budget increases in 2017? There's an inability to say no. He's a liberal voting Republican.
Mr. Loonan, would you like to address that?
Oh, yeah. So this is where I need to educate about tails. When an appropriation comes in, and this is when the DFL was involved, and they want to get X amount of money to a program, in this case education or some aspect of education, because we have to balance the budget every biennium, they come in and let's say they want to give $1 million. Well, we're going to give $400 million the first biennium, $400 million the second biennium, which that we aren't even here yet. And the third biennium, you get the $200 million. So when you come in those years, that money is already committed to the budget. So you've got those tails to deal with, which are very, very problematic and are deceptive.
We'll move on now to the next topic of transportation and begin with Mr. Loonan. The question is, if the recent pivot to more employees working from home becomes permanent, how should this affect transportation spending and planning for the state of Minnesota?
Well, you've got to get current data. Obviously, the data we have is antiquated right now. This should affect a lot of things. This should affect what auto insurance costs. It should go down. Claims are going down dramatically. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a tax too, and I sell the stuff. But the transportation spending right now, what's going on is that when you have public transit, it borderline on a welfare program. Currently, users of transit in Hennepin and Ramsey County fund 28% of the operating costs and pay nothing for the infrastructure costs. The light rail projects that come in. If you move a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road, it costs about $4 million a mile to do that. It's a lot of money, a mile. Light rail is $131 million a mile. I had gotten some complaints about Minnesota Valley Transit about all the empty buses, running around town here. And so I contacted them and I sat down with them about it. And I said, yeah, people are frustrated because it's not environmental, not cost effective. So what do? They got an appropriation from the Met Council and they tinted the windows so now you can't see that they're empty.
Mr. Mortensen, do you have any rebuttal on those points, or would you like to address the question?
I'll just address the question. Of course, we should evaluate transportation spending and priorities. But in so many cases, what you see happening at the government level is these bureaucrats seem to think that they know what's best and that they're going to predict the future and what we should all be doing as individuals. So I think this is a great example of creativity that will likely happen out there. And every individual in the state will end up adopting or adapting their behavior. And then we'll see different, who knows what will come to light. I know Minneapolis is putting scooters in place. So I think the marketplace will be innovative there.
Mr. Loonan?
Yeah, I'd like to actually clean up whatever he just said there. The bureaucrats, what they do is, and legislators, they will gut roads and bridges accounts because they know people understand the importance of that. And then it happened 2 years ago. Then they reallocate that money into a transit fund. Then they turn around and say, well, we need a gas tax. We need a gas tax because our highway fund is deficient. Well, a gas tax hurts people in Shakopee a lot because so many of us commute into the cities, have a long drive into work. It disproportionately affects people in rural areas as well. It's not a fair tax.
So moving to the next question, Mr. Mortensen, what qualifies you as the best candidate in this race?
Well, I'm the only conservative in this race, and you don't have to take my word for it. That's sort of the beauty of this race. Bob's voting record is very public. It's easily looked up. So I'm the most conservative. And when we see what's happening across the state, this systemic liberalism that's running rampant across the state, clearly we're not doing well. So we need to re-embrace what it means to really be an American fundamentally and restore the values that we've held dear for so long. And those are the values that I plan to fight on in the Capitol. Unfortunately, Bob and his 4-year record, he refused to fight for the values that we believe in. So I feel I'm definitely the better candidate between the two.
Mr. Loonan, what qualifies you as the best candidate in the race?
Well, experience. Again, Erik's never been on a council, never been on a board, doesn't understand that, well, just because I think something, even if I'm correct, doesn't mean that it just goes. You've got to work with people. You've got to come together. You got to at least do what you agree on. You have to at least do that. The other thing that makes me most qualified, I'm going to win in November. I'm going to win in November because I'm a 38-year insurance agent in town. I'm a 35-year coach in town. 27 years working with youth on gun safety classes. I've been involved. I'm active in my parish. I've got kids that are involved in the community that are coaches and teachers and realtors. I'm going to win in November. We have to get the seat back for the Republican. Erik didn't win and won't win because of the rhetoric he just said. This unelastic intolerance that doesn't bring people in for support. And we can't afford to lose the seat again. This is an important election. This is a 10-year election. This is going to have to do with voters redistricting. And so we've got to get this right. And the party that's in the majority is going to determine that redistricting.
Look, we lost this seat in 2014. That's when conservatives lost this seat. We didn't know it at the time, but now we do.
So the next substantive topic, the Second Amendment. This begins with Mr. Loonan. Do you support red flag gun seizure bills, and why or why not?
No, I don't. There's no due process in it. The problem with the red flag is that a disgruntled ex-spouse or something like that could simply contend that there was a problem, and that gun owner doesn't get a due process for finding out if they should have a gun or not. Not everyone should have a gun. Not everyone should. However, we have to have a process in place that is fair. It needs to be transparent, which forces fairness into the system. I'd co-authored a bill that is coming into play right now that prevented Governor Walz from closing gun shops or confiscating guns during a time of emergencies. And we passed that. And because of an omnibus bill we put it in, we forced Mark Dayton to sign that bill. That's how we got that done. Otherwise, that would have never have happened. Now, our Second Amendment rights are protected through this time of just completely different sets of rules.
Mr. Mortensen, what's your position on red flag gun seizure bills?
Yeah, I'm against them. Taking away somebody's property before they've been even charged with a crime, it's unconstitutional. But I can't help but once again laugh because Bob says one thing, but turns around and says something else to somebody different. I talked to one of your neighbors, and he said, I had an hour-and-a-half conversation about red flag gun laws with Bob. And Bob said, they're fine. They're not a big deal. As long as we get rid of the ex parte hearing, he thought it was hunky-dory.
Mr. Loonan?
I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, you do.
Again. I guess eventually he's going to call me an aerobics instructor, too. I guess he can say whatever you want.
So next question, Mr. Mortensen. If you happen to lose the primary election, would you support Mr. Loonan as the candidate?
I would provide Bob with a survey that would say, are you going to change your behavior and actually vote like a conservative instead of a liberal Democrat? And part of that survey would say, if you fail to do so, if you would vote for 10% budget increases, if you vote for red flag gun laws, if you don't protect life, then that you would pledge to resign. At that point, if he signed that pledge, yes, I would support him.
Do you have a response to that?
Oh, yeah. So what happens in those situations is those things that he talked about, I'm already in those positions. They've got this narrative on his side, and some of it he's
Votes
signing,
don't
so I'm
lie.
assuming it's from him that are on his sides. You go look at my voting record. I have the luxury of having a voting record, 100% pro-life voting record, a pro-Second Amendment voting record. We were able to stop some of the gun-grabbing bills that were out there by the liberals. I agree with him on that those we definitely have to defend our Second Amendment right. It's just this mischaracterization gets a little annoying.
If you're such a conservative, why does the Taxpayers League give you a D-? Why does Action for Liberty give you an F when they scorecard votes on government growth? Why does LEA, who scorecards votes on constitutionality, give you an F? A real conservative should get A grades from these organizations.
Mr. Loonan, what's your response?
I'll take this lob. So there's a website called Minnesota Scammers. Some of the very groups that he talked about, some of these groups are supporting him, are known grifters. What they do is they have no clout, no power. Most of them aren't even lobbyists over at the Capitol. All they do is they get involved in campaigns and they fundraise. And they're bad actors. MinnesotaScammers.com. You go to the website, you will see them all listed there. Minnesota Gun Rights, Minnesota Pro-Life, which is the Door Brothers. They're all just skunk groups. They are a big problem.
So the same question back to you then, Mr. Loonan. If you lose the primary election, would you support Mr. Mortensen openly as the Republican candidate and also urge your supporters to do the same?
Yeah, this seat has to become Republican. Now, what do you mean by support openly? Frankly, some of the lying that's been going on is going to make it very difficult for me to acquiesce simply because there's a little thing of personal integrity. And we had talked about this beforehand, how important it was to conduct this primary so that when it is done, that we can come back together. He hasn't done that. I feel I have. Now, maybe he doesn't feel I have, but I feel I have. I've tried to stay on the high road for that very reason, is that if we're going to take the House back, and that's the plan, we have to take back the Chanhassen seat and we have to take back the Shakopee seat. So the road to the Republican majority comes right through here. And so it's important to do that. But I would hope some of the rhetoric would tone down a little bit because it just makes it hard for people to support them. And that's, again, 2 years ago, that's why he lost. I'm not going to lose in November. I'll beat Brad Tapke. I'm built for the general election.
Mr. Mortensen?
Sure, I would think you would know we need a lot more seats than 2. I think there's a 9-seat majority from the Democrats. So in 2018, there was a huge election. It was just like Obama's first midterm, where Democrats across the country swept across. More people voted Democrat in our district in 2018 than they did in 2016 for Hillary Clinton. So it was a very fluke year, and you know this, but it doesn't go through your talking point. And I would just say votes don't lie. Everything I'm saying is 100% factual, and I urge people to look it up.
So, gentlemen, we all came in with masks today, including yourselves, in compliance with the governor's order. But we'd like to know how you feel about the mask mandate, and we'll begin with Mr. Loonan.
Frankly, I don't like it, but I'm going to do it. I'm a law and order guy, okay? We are in a situation we're in right now. What helped me a lot was when the Surgeon General of the United States said, wearing a mask in public, you feel like you're being told to do something. Nobody likes being mandated. I certainly don't. But it's a sign of respect to the other people in that room. Is that, you know what? I'm concerned about you. I'm acknowledging that you may have a concern. I don't know what health-wise that you have. And so I'm doing it and plan on doing it as long as we have to. My concern is that the trust isn't there as far as the science because it keeps jumping around a lot. And I think everyone involved, Democrat or Republican, wish that had gone differently, that it was all a little linear, that people could believe the data that's out there. But when it moves around, people are going, oh, geez, wait a minute, this is like situational. And I'm concerned that the mask mandate was simply creating a conditioning situation for keeping the schools closed. Mr.
Mortensen, what's your position?
I don't support it. I think that's pretty obvious. I've been talking about COVID-19 since February. And in fact, Bob had nothing to say. When the whole world was talking about COVID-19 for 5 months, he had nothing to say. Like the only one in the world who didn't have an opinion on this. So I've been leading this effort locally for months. And, I cannot support it. I can't take orders from one individual. I believe in letting people make the best decisions for themselves and their loved ones. And a mask mandate 5 months into this, when we have flattened the curve, we've seen our deaths come down in Minnesota. The fatality rate for this has been reported by some universities to be 80 times less than initially thought. Where this whole bill of goods was sold to us on a virus that was supposed to be 10 times deadlier than the flu.
Yes, Mr. Loonan.
When they talk about cases, and they're very careful to control the lexicon, they talk about cases. It's important to know 80% of the people that are tested positive are asymptomatic and never have any symptoms at all. So it actually is very different than they're making it look. As far as me giving my opinion, the only one without an opinion, what I've learned over my 60 years is that opinions are like rumps. Everybody's got one. Most people aren't interested in hearing somebody else's. If I don't own a stethoscope, so there's no reason for me to give a medical diagnosis on this.
At a time like this, when the whole world is looking for strong leadership, Bob Loonan was nowhere to be found.
Mr. Mortensen, moving back to the Second Amendment topic, is it your opinion that means militias have the right to bear arms or individuals?
Individuals have the right to bear arms.
And Mr. Loonan?
I agree. It's in the Constitution. It's there for a reason. It should be responsible gun ownership. But right, that's the gun laws, the gun grabber laws that are out there right now aren't designed for gun safety. They're designed to take guns away from people. You want to increase gun safety, increase the penalty for illegal use of firearms. Those stolen guns that are used in crime, do that enhancement. But when that bill was proposed on the House floor by the Republicans, the Democrats shot down the bill because they didn't want that, which seemed odd. And then I realized that will increase the disparity of arrests between different communities. And so that killed the bill.
Anything further on that, Mr. Mortensen?
Well, I would just add that, criminals, they look for soft targets. That's what predators do. And so I feel we need to I've pledged to sponsor constitutional carry. Last time Bob was our legislator, he was asked to carry a constitutional carry bill, but he refused to do it, citing something about rapists shouldn't have guns. I don't think he understands what constitutional carry even means.
Mr. Loonan?
Yeah, so I remember that conversation with Joe Diddle. And Joe Diddle came over to the Capitol. Now, by the way, there's somebody who tried telling me how to vote. That's the only person that's ever done that, okay? Now, you're taking your shot at it, but you're like a screaming kid in Walmart, and I could care less. But you go through on a constitutional carry, and I asked him, I said, well, what exactly is a constitutional carry? And he says, everybody and anybody can buy any gun and carry it anywhere, anyway. I don't agree with that. I think there's people that shouldn't have guns.
Moving now to another topic, and this will begin with Mr. Loonan. How would you work with other elected officials from both the Republican and the Democrat parties to get things accomplished for the citizens of Scott County?
Well, first of all, you have to have a respectful relationship. That's square one on this. You have to, and that's work, by the way. Sitting down with someone that thinks different than you is very, very difficult. But if you're going to legislate, if you're going to discover what you agree on and at least get that done, you have to make that effort. Frankly, I have not seen Erik Mortensen demonstrate a drop of that. You either totally agree with him or you're the devil. And the groups that are behind him are the same way. That doesn't work. That's in the legislature, they call that you're just put in the corner and you get nothing done. There are a lot of different ways of thinking about stuff. I go through, I've talked to DFL legislators that I couldn't believe where they're coming. Then when they explain their point of view, now I understood it better. I still didn't agree with it, but at least now I understood it better. I learn more listening to people who don't think like me than listening to people that completely agree with me.
Mr. Mortensen.
Sure. So I feel like in society now, we get clustered into these groups, this sort of group thought, and certainly political party is one of these major groups that people tend to flock towards or kind of get bunched into. And that has little impact on me. I mean, certainly you can categorize some people, I suppose, but I'm willing to work with anybody. I don't care what party label they have behind their name, so long as they share the mission of getting the government and the burden of government out of people's lives. That's my mission.
I want to
go ahead, Mr. Loonan.
Okay. So there was a comment Erik had that he wanted to defund the daycare subsidy that is designed to help low-income families work out of welfare. I absolutely think that program needs to remain. The problem with that program is there's so much fraud, and all that fraud, not all of it, the bulk of it is being committed in one community. Canning that program are going to harm families that are getting out of welfare, and now you're punishing the bank instead of the bank robber.
Well, if you're going to pull something out of your hat, what I would say is, look, it's not the legislature's job to police these agencies. That's the role of the governor. And if the governor cannot get the CCAP program in order, then the legislature should make that tough decision that he refuses to make and chop that program out. And they could start something new. But when it's 50% fraudulent, of which you never took any action on it when it was well published, I think we should scrap the program and start anew.
Go ahead, Mr. Loonan.
Okay, well, this is what I mean by the little misnomers, or I don't know. I come from a town of 199 people. They call it lying. We did take action on it. What happened is we went through and we voted to go after that fraud off of the legislative auditor's report. That provision got vetoed by Governor Dayton.
So this will be our last question before the closing comments, and it goes first to Mr. Mortensen, and it has to do with the issues of police and security. So in light of recent events, what types of police reforms would you support, if any?
Sure. That's a tough question because I'm a law enforcement major. Went to school to be a cop. I've had positions in law enforcement, and my heart goes out to what they go through every day. But that said, not 100% of police officers are good police officers, like any other trade. But do you really want to make an example out of these rare interactions with police officers and have some sort of sweeping reform because of these high touch point or high visibility issues out there? I think there's probably a handful of things you could do. No knock warrants. I think taking some laws off the books, like let's say the mask law, so we can remove some of the kind of meaningless interactions with law enforcement. I would start with those.
Mr. Loonan, the same question to you. In light of the recent events, what types of police reforms would you support, if any?
Sure. Well, first of all, the realities are in the adult world is there's a little thing called union contracts. One of the things the legislature can do is capsulate or pinch down on union contracts that make it so difficult, so hard to get rid of a bad cop. We've got the same problem in education. It is so hard because of these arbitration aspects in the contracts to get rid of bad teachers. Same thing with state employees. And I think that's where you're going to see your opportunity to get it done. I'm a law enforcement guy myself. I can't imagine having that job. I can't imagine going out every morning and wondering if you're coming home. And what they have to put up with. I did a ride along 2 different times with cops and saw the high incidence of mental illness that they deal with and addiction issues that they deal with. And I'm not saying that we train a cop and make him a psychologist or whatever, but we do create the communication channel tighter. We're going, here, you don't have to take him to jail or to the emergency room. You take him over to this service that's provided for them that's a little more appropriate on how to handle them. It's a tough job, and I'm grateful for them.
So we'll move now to closing statements. You'll have 2 minutes each, and we'll begin with Mr. Loonan.
All right, thank you. Again, I want to thank the Chamber for doing this. I know there's a lot of logistics involved in it. And this is a above average important election because this is a 10-year election. Who's ever in the majority is going to determine voting districts. And voting districts get set up to try to turn the legislative body either DFL or GOP. And that's all going to happen out here in the suburb area. That's where the battle's going to be. I'm going to win in November. I'm the candidate that can win in November. If it's important to the voters out there to have this seat go back in Republican hands, then Bob Loonan's your vote. I'm the only candidate who promises to caucus with Republicans to get that all-important majority, which decides so many things. Who the committee chairmen are, what bills get advanced. If the Republicans were in the majority, there's all kinds of bills that went through in the last 2 years that never would have saw the light of day. They're just ridiculous. Going through, and the Speaker of the House is determined by the majority too, and that who runs the rules on the floor. I have a history of community involvement in here. That's what's going to enable me to win the general election. Haven't lost to Democrats. I had a very contentious primary my first time running. The local Republican Party didn't endorse me then, and I won by 17 votes. Went on to beat the Democrat, Jay Whiting, by almost 2,000 votes. That's because I'm built for the general election. I represent the values of Shakopee, and the people who aren't normally engaged see that, and they come back into it. This next race, this next time we go in, because of the redistricting, because of the budget deficit that we're going to see, we don't need to be sending an amateur in. You know, he loves saying, you call me a career politician. Let me tell you what a career politician I am. When I was on the school board, I served 2 terms, and then I didn't run again. And they said, well, why aren't you running again? Well, because, and maybe he's me 20 years ago, the way I handled myself on the board, I alienated some of the other board members. And I became ineffective. And I voted myself off the board by not running again. Again, if you want this seat to go over to the Republican side, Bob Loonan is your vote.
Mr. Mortensen.
Thank you. Well, I would first say there's no point in electing a Republican to this seat if they vote like a Democrat. You know, everywhere I go, people tell me how sick and tired they are of these rhino Republicans. These fake Republicans that run all around town, masquerading around, claiming they're some staunch conservative. And then, so we do our part. But of course, they're making all the same promises every year. It's all the same promises every time. So Republicans, we do our job. We elect these people. We get them off to the Capitol, be it D.C. or St. Paul. And what happens? They vote like Democrats. And then they come back to us, just like Bob just spent the last 35 minutes telling us, and they gave us the litany of excuses why they couldn't get anything done. It was the governor's fault. It was the Supreme Court's fault. It was the Senate's fault. It's always somebody else's fault. It's this 24/7 of being a victim and how they couldn't do anything. He was a lawmaker. He absolutely had the ability to do things if he chose to fight for them. And what I've been talking about is Bob's record. The beauty of this whole thing for me is Bob can call me a liar until he's blue in the face, like he is kind of now. I don't really care because the votes don't lie. So you can look that up for yourself. Look, so this election is an important election. As I hear people talk about how tired they are of these fake Republicans, on August 11th, you have the ability, Republicans in this district, to go to the ballot box and either put another rhino fake Republican back in St. Paul, who will squander another 2 years, Or you can put a conservative champion in St. Paul that'll actually get something done.
On behalf of the Chamber Public Policy Committee,
I'd be willing to keep going.
I've got people meeting at my house and, well, right now.
we appreciate your time. Our time is up, but thank you both for participating.
Thanks.